the point with Google Analytics is that it basically ends at a moment where it's getting interesting for streaming, right? It's not made for streaming purposes, and basically ends the tracking where it hits the event play, and everything that comes after is not really out of the box included in Google Analytics. And therefore, if you really want to work with data in the streaming industry, you need to dig much deeper and specifically look what's going on in the stream.
You can find this podcast on simplestream.com, as well as on your favourite platforms, including Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and more. If you enjoyed the show, follow us, leave a review, join the conversation, and leave a comment on LinkedIn and Twitter. You can find Simplestream and Beyond the Stream there too.
Hi, this is Edward coming to you from Beyond the Stream. Today we're here with Till Sudworth, CMO and Head of Business Video at NPAW. That's Nice People at Work. Till, you've had an interesting career. You started off, you mentioned to me earlier that you were the deputy lead of IPTV for Deutsche Telekom, and you also took them up to 2 million customers as the P&L lead for pay TV. So how did this get you to the point you are in your career right now?
It's a good question. Ask that myself sometimes as well. No, one very interesting thing actually is that when we launched that project, we had then the issue that we were actually completely blind in about the perceptions and the acceptance of the end user, and did they have any quality issues, or how did they experience our product. And back then we actually built our own product because there was no analytics solution in the market. We're talking about 2006, 2007. And so, we always had that, or I always had that point in my career where I was wondering, how does the end user actually experience your product? And then after working for Deutsche Telekom for a while, I went further to Sky, worked for Sky in Germany for quite a while, for I think 3 years. And then I left a little bit the industry market, working a little bit into startups and raised startups and worked for smaller companies. And I experienced myself that I really like working for smaller companies, but I missed the TV industry. So for me, it was a kind of a natural next step to go back to the TV industry and working for a B2B company and not anymore as a B2C company, because that's basically, specifically in Germany, most covered by big enterprise companies. Mm-hmm. So I ended at NPAW, and it was quite interesting actually. One of the first customers won during my time at Deutsche Telekom. Well, I didn't win it myself, but it was Deutsche Telekom. And that was interesting because then they actually killed the homemade solution that they had built in 2007 and replaced it with our solution. So kind of, closing the loop.
Nice career. Full circle moment for you there in your career.
Absolutely.
And you also mentioned you mentioned startups there. You actually took a startup from the start right through to 250 employees and sale.
Yeah. Well, unfortunately, it wasn't my company. Otherwise, I wouldn't need to work anymore. But yeah, it was a completely different approach in the food industry. Actually, we sold it to Dr. Oetker, which was quite interesting and a very, very great moment to really build a company from scratch, and just enforced me to that is what I like to do as well, company building and working for smaller companies.
I mean, your experience actually puts you at a perfect place then to talk about how important data is to businesses, especially when it comes to video, because obviously you've got a lot of experience in TV. So how has the industry actually changed since those days in Deutsche Telekom to today?
Yeah, a lot, I think, very much. In my career, I also worked for an e-commerce company, and there experience how much these industries work with data. There's actually no decision that is not data-based in this industry. And in 2006, 2007, the best data that we had was surveys that were like 3 months old and like very, very small group of people. And we kind of tried to read and learn out of these surveys. And I think that changed completely. Right now, it's much faster. You have data available in seconds in real time. And therefore, you really are in the position to make database decisions, and not back as in 2007, where we actually, if you look back now, we were completely blind and we didn't know a lot about our customers.
No, of course. I mean, you're going from, like, in the TV industry, at least in the UK, bar-rated content and, just having a sample audience rather than your entire customer base at your hands.
Exactly.
So the data at your hands now is completely different to what you had back then. It's an insane difference when you think about it, because you're not
Yeah,
having to worry about sample audiences. You're down at an individual level.
absolutely.
And an interesting point that we discovered from a recent report we did is called Consumers in the Modern Age. We asked people whether they were comfortable with sharing their data for streaming services. And we actually found that just over 40% of them weren't happy to opt in with data sharing. And is this something you're seeing as an issue with your customers?
Not really, to be honest. I mean, of course, it's a super important topic to be, having data security as one of. I mean, we work with with the data of our customers and with their end users. So we are 3 times ISO certificated. We take the GDPR very seriously. This is, of course, a super important preliminary, more or less, right, to ensure that the end user is feeling well as well to giving away the data. I think in TV experience or the TV industry, it's so important to have good data for offering a better product for the end user. So actually, I think the end user is highly benefiting from providing data, not only in terms of getting recommendations and really valuable recommendations that fit to your usage and not come up with strange results on the one side, but also in terms of delivering great quality of experience, so that they can see the live sports event, for example, without buffer ratio, without any crashes. So I think the end user needs to understand that in TV industry, it's a super complex product, right? It's a super complex product to manage, and therefore TV providers need to have data to really provide the best quality of experience and the best product experience that they can, that the end user can hope to have.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, what we saw in a white paper we did with NPAW over the past year was we were speaking to our customer base, and we found that one of our customers in the Nordic region had found that they were having an issue with buffering. There was an unacceptable buffer ratio that their customers were experiencing, which in that region didn't make much sense, because over 95% of people that had the internet there were actually on fiber optic broadband, so they should be experiencing the best speeds possible. But through using the Ubora platform that NPAW provides, they were able to find out that it was an individual ISP, internet service provider, narrow it down to them, and actually speak to that provider themselves to get the issue resolved, because it was actually an issue on their side, not them. But obviously, without that sort of data at hand, you'd be potentially losing a lot of customers there, because a lot of people nowadays, they're not going to sit around and wait for something to buffer. They're going to go on to the next service, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
So,
I mean, the competition is fierce, right? I mean, we all have that as an end user as well. We have so many different options and choices in terms of SWOT, TWOT, AWOT, BWOT, you name it, and now ad fast, etc. So, I mean, the amount of content that you can choose of is unlimited, right? So I think, and we know that, and we see that also in our data, and we hear that from our customers, that it's getting more and more important to have a high quality of experience, and a low quality of experience is a major churn cause or reason. And so, yeah, as you said, I mean, if you have a bad experience in a great football match, and you have the chance to watch that football match on some other platform, you might go to the next platform the next time.
Yeah, definitely. You don't want to miss a goal.
Yeah.
I recently spoke with Evan Shapiro as well, or Shapiro rather. Sorry, Evan. He mentioned in his talk at IBC big tech Death Stars, and we also discussed that on the episode of the podcast we did with him. And the data that these big tech Death Stars have is putting them at an advantage in the streaming wars now. And does that correlate with the results that your customers are seeing as a result of using your solutions?
It correlates at least with the experience that we do while talking to our customers or prospects, specifically when it comes to broadcasters or public broadcasters. They are in the learning curve of using data at the very, very beginning, right? And obviously, the big 5 tech companies that you're mentioning, I guess, or that everyone was mentioning in his article, they are, they're collecting data since years, and they are able to use the data. And that, I think that is even the more important point, that we see with a lot of our prospects or customers, that some of them, they figured out meanwhile that they need data, right? But they don't know how to use it. They don't have the internal skills. They don't have the people with the skill set to really use and leverage data and the benefit of data. And therefore, I think the advantage is still there of the big 5 tech companies, and it will increase, and broadcasters need to speed it up, I think, to stop that gap that is getting bigger and bigger, and to get to use how to use data and how to leverage and work with data. It's getting more important, right?
Yeah, definitely. I think broadcasters are certainly taking note of that. You see things like recently in the past month, you see like Everyone TV, which is the partnership company between all of the PSBs, public service broadcasters in the UK, coming together to create a new platform which is freely offering IP TV, basically taking the Freeview service that exists in the UK, one of the most popular, and then taking that directly over IP, so delivering that to smart TVs. I mean, with them doing that and taking it completely IP, not going terrestrial satellite cable, then they're actually going to be able to leverage solutions like you provide at NPAW to get much greater data on their customer base, not relying on bar-braided content anymore, and then being able to see at an individual level, what's actually performing really well. And I think that's the big advantage when we talk about those big tech companies. You think about Netflix and their recommendations, it's pretty on point, right? Because they can actually take that data at an individual level and provide you with good recommendations.
Yeah, but they have experience with that for over years already, right? I mean, they're working with data from the very first moment, as they were more or less an e-commerce company at the beginning, right? So, I mean, they used to work with data, and they improved that work with data over the last years. And broadcast, as I said, I mean, just a few months ago, there was one of the biggest broadcasters in Europe actually came to me and said, we know we need to use data, we just don't know for what. Right, and that is for some broadcasters, that is still the situation. And also, we've been to a panel yesterday at an event here in London. They also told us, a big broadcaster told us, it's such an effort to have the internal change, right, of the people, and to let them understand that the world changing, and the technology that they use for decades is changing, and therefore also the possibilities and the mindsets need to change, right? So I think the mindset is an important thing. And then, of course, the skill sets. You need as well to have data and to work with data. And as you said, it's a big advantage for the big US companies.
And I mean, in terms of where these broadcasters things might go, first of all, I suppose it's more relevant to smaller to medium-sized companies. But I think you see a lot of them initially going for things that are open source or free to use, like Google Analytics, right? And do you think that's actually suitable to be used by streaming services, something like Google Analytics?
Not at all, obviously. No, I mean, seriously, the point with Google Analytics is that it basically ends at a moment where it's getting interesting for streaming, right? It's not made for streaming purposes, and basically ends the tracking where it hits the event play, and everything that comes after is not really out of the box included in Google Analytics. And therefore, if you really want to work with data in the streaming industry, you need to dig much deeper and specifically look what's going on in the stream, and therefore Google cannot provide that service, right? So that is one point. On top of that, of course, we have in Europe at least always the discussion about how close is Google to the GDPR. There's a lot of discussions and a lot of potential lawsuits going on, not against Google, but against the users of Google. So we have a lot of specifically public broadcasters that don't use Google for exactly that reason, that they are afraid of that they might, break the GDPR rule with that. So that is another topic, the kind of, insecurity in that question. And of course, it's a product that is for free. And as you mentioned before, right, if you use a product for free, your data basically is the product. So you're the product, and people need to be aware that they're giving away, the broadcaster, the public broadcasters, or the platform, the TV platforms, they're giving away important data that they should actually use and not give to Google. So therefore, of course, we recommend other analytics tools specifically for made for streaming.
Yeah, and it makes sense because at least when you go beyond just the public broadcasters and things, when you go to the consumer level, their concerns, as I highlighted before in our report, we find that their concerns are about, where's my data going? When really that person has probably got a Gmail account, uses Google Maps to go everywhere, puts reservations, everything, does their shopping through Google Chrome, and they're worried then about opting in to data sharing on a streaming service.
Yeah.
Whereas, that if they're worried about data sharing, their concern, I don't think, should be with the streaming platform, but maybe with those free services they're using, as you mentioned yourself. They are the product at that point.
On top of Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok.
Exactly. Coming back to that then, Till, if you yourself were running a streaming service, what analytics would be a must-have?
In terms of KPIs, you mean?
Yeah.
I think there's no specific KPI. There's not the one silver bullet in KPI. I think the important thing is that you have, on the one side, aggregated data and individual data. As I mentioned at the very beginning at Deutsche Telekom, you need to have a clear understanding which customers has problems, and when he calls you in the hotline, you know already what kind of problems he has. So individual data is important as well. But also aggregated data, of course, to be able to improve your overall service. If see overall the aggregated buffer ratio is too high, you need to work on that. I think in terms of with what kind of data should you start, I think it would be the quality of experience data, as we mentioned before. You need to have, run a smooth, super performing platform in terms of perceived quality of the end user. On top of that, you have a lot of different things like user journey, content consumption patterns that you can track. But I think the most important step as a first step would be to really analyze and improve your quality of experience to ensure that your customer has a super performing quality of experience and a super performing product, right?
Going back to then everything we've covered so far, I mean, what I take away from this is use a platform that is fit for purpose, obviously, because like you mentioned, it's the quality of experience for your customers. That's the main part of this, because they're used to services that are hyper performing. Like you think of like your Netflix, Disney Plus, that kind of thing. Those are billion-dollar companies. To be able to match that, the first thing you need to do is leverage data, right?
Yeah, maybe the first thing to do actually is even to think about what do you use the data for, right? So before actually gathering and using the data, you need to have a clear understanding of what is your main reason or what is the main goal to use data, right? I think that is where a lot of companies struggling. You just questioned what is the one KPI that you want to track, and I think the one KPI or the KPIs that you want to track, are completely different if you are having live TV on demand TV. A good example always is the buffer ratio, right? A buffer ratio is a KPI that you might accept on the live TV, but on demand not as much, or vice versa, right? Or even better, the join time, right? Join time. So how long does a video need to get started at the very beginning? If it's on demand, you can accept a little bit longer a join time at the beginning, and therefore maybe having then a lower buffer ratio as a trade-off. But if you have a live TV and you have a long join time, that ends in the situation that your neighbor is celebrating the goal, minutes before you, and you don't want to have that, right?
No.
Or you get a WhatsApp of your friend celebrating the goal, and you don't see that
you're way behind.
You're way behind. So therefore, in live TV, a low join time is much more important than in on demand. So really, it is important, the first step, having a clear strategy of how you want to use data and what for you want to use data. That is the first step, and then collecting the data, because otherwise you're ending up with having a lot of data but cannot use it and leverage it. And I think that is actually what a lot of companies also do wrong, or they fail by using data.
Yeah. And I mean, you mentioned there about live events, and it's interesting because we found that it was a little over the fifth of the sample population we took in the UK was choosing live events more than any other type of content. And is that something you're seeing across your customer base then? Are live events on the up?
I think it depends. If you're looking for broadcasters, right? I think live events is is the one thing where still everybody gathering around a device and having that kind of campfire situation like we had back in the days. So I think live events is still, you see, that's where the broadcast, I think, investing a lot of money, right? Having big shows, having great live sports triggers incredibly the usage of platforms. And we actually analyze just in the last report, or we actually do continuously analyzing all the live sport events, and we see that almost all the live sports event that we had this year, and we had tons of them, really increased the usage, right, of our customers. So it is a big push for the end users for sure.
And with that in mind, then, I mean, in terms of live events, I'm thinking about ones that hinge, like sectors that actually hinge on that, like sports, news, music. I mean, would they utilize analytics tools differently to, say, other sectors? Like, is there a specific sort of data set they might dig into more, or they might find more value in?
Yeah, as I mentioned before a little bit, there are KPIs, specific KPIs that are more relevant for live TV than for on-demand content, for sure. Yeah, I mean, it's it really depends on what you want to do, right? I mean, for example, sampling and the entire analyzing of the content consumption patterns is for sure something that you might do more in on-demand content, in stream, in series, than in live sports maybe. Yeah, it differs a little bit. I mean, specifically, as I mentioned before, when it comes to buffer ratio and join time.
Yeah, I mean, for me, like, if something doesn't load immediately, I'm incredibly impatient, so I just turn it off. So I can definitely see that would be important, especially in live events, as you mentioned. Like, if you're watching the football, you want it to be available straight away and be on time as well.
Yeah, but I mean, sometimes in live sports, for example, there's only one exclusive right holder, right? So you don't have a chance to switch off and go somewhere else if you want to watch it. Yeah. You be patient, and therefore you might accept a little bit longer or more issues, but you're going to pay back in the next day on Twitter or X, how it's called now, and talking about the bad quality. Then
we found that over 56% of the sample audience we surveyed were looking at a cheaper pricing tier for but sport, entertainment, education, and lifestyle streaming services. They didn't really differentiate between those types of content in terms of how much they were willing to pay. Unsurprisingly, perhaps, the gross majority, which was over 56%, agreed that £5 to £9.99 per month was what they'd be willing to pay for those services. And I think, especially for sports, you think about how expensive those rights are to get. I mean, that's not going to equate to a profitable business, I imagine, for a lot of those sports entities. And how do you think data leveraging might actually help them in that position where you're seeing people with less money and people who are less willing to actually pay for those services?
Yeah, first of all, I think we will see a consolidation in the market, right? We see that quite interesting. A data point that we tracked is the usage of a platform per user. And that was actually decreasing over the last few years. So we had the thesis that users are experimenting or trying out a lot of different platforms and having a lot of different subscriptions at the same time, and therefore the amount that they can spend on one specific platform is smaller, right? Because they're sharing their time. They don't add additional time for entertainment. They just share the time. And we see actually this year that the first time since 4 years, I think, that KPI is turning around, and actually the usage per platform per user is increasing. So this could be a indicator for that a lot of people, churn from some platforms that they used in the last few years, and they either decided that it's not worth it, or they watched all good relevant content for them, and focused a little bit less different platforms. And I think that shows quite well how strong the competition is, right? And how you need to be best in class to really win the customer. And winning the customer is one thing, but more important is then to keep the customer, to keep them from churning. And that is something where data is incredibly important, right? To really understand your end user, providing him the best experience not only in terms of quality, we talked about that a few times, but also specifically there in terms of offering the relevant content for him, giving the best user experience in terms of how he navigates to the platform, how he actually identifies the relevant content for him. We all, are end users as well, and we all had experience of a bad recommendation engine where it shows some really strange content recommendations, maybe based because of account sharing or even profile sharing that end users do. And therefore you get some really useless recommendations. And then the other thing there with the recommendation is that what I experienced, if you look a lot, you sticking to your wheel, you don't find really new content anymore.
No.
Sometimes it's really helpful to actually sign on with a different account or profile to get new recommendations. So I think having a really good working data profile there is incredibly important to really keep the end user engaged, and also not only keeping them engaged on the platform, but also maybe with direct to consumer campaigns where you want to have samples based on usage and based on user profiles to really keep him, keeping engaged and push him into the usage.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting point you say about sharing profiles, because for me personally, as a consumer, I let my dad use my Spotify. And unfortunately for me, that means that I'm in the top 5% of Billy Joel fans worldwide. So my recommendations are way off sometimes. Yeah. For the majority, it's okay, but it does definitely send me a lot of Billy Joel, which I'm okay with, but at the same time, it's not really what I want. Yeah. So, I mean, you mentioned about, say, consumer campaigns and like if they're wanting to push a certain product from a particular advertiser. How are you going to differentiate there? Because, I mean, you're going to have people that continue to share profiles. So how useful is that data really going to be for those types of campaigns if people are sharing profiles a lot?
Well, to be honest, it's nothing that we do, that there are a lot of possibilities to sharpen the profile, right? To understand, for example, one methodology that people, news or companies use is the time of when do they watch, to identify if there are different kind of users using one account or one profile, and then to separate the recommendation based on these different profiles. So it's more than only usage in terms of what do they watch. It's also when do they watch and which device do they watch it. With these kind of information and of course much more information, you can actually define pretty precise profiles and identify if there are more users behind one profile, and then you can separate your campaigns based on these different data sets. So with if you're facing that issue, it's even more important to dig deeper into the data and to really being able to create strong profiles.
I mean, in that case, I kind of wish that Spotify used NPAW instead, because then I'd get less Billy Joel. But I'm going to go on to like the last question that I'm going to ask you today, Till. And that is quite a big one. So prepare yourself.
Okay.
What does the future of data analytics solutions look like for streaming services?
We're having so many data points out there that we can use, that it's getting more and more complex and almost impossible for human beings to use that data in a sensible way and in a way that it really brings benefits to the companies. So I think AI. I mean, it's a thing that everybody's talking about, but I think specifically when it comes to data, a massive benefit and a big use case for machine learning and AI approaches, and I think in specifically in a way where you help to increase the efficiency of using data in terms of processing 1,000 data or million data points at the same time, very short time in real time. It's getting impossible for human beings, right? And then not only processing them, but also making database decisions. So I think the first phase might be something where you have AI support you to analyze the data, and the second phase might be something where AI actually helps you to take the next best action based on the data sets, right?
Yeah.
So that's something where we are very convinced of, and the last 4 days I've been to a few panels and events, and everybody was talking about AI. Obviously, I mean it's last year was fast, this year it's AI. But I do believe strongly that this is a topic that will, we simply don't know the benefits and where it actually ends and where it goes right now. But it reminds me strongly to around 2000 when Google started without any real business case back then, right? In 97, 98, and look where they are now, right? So I think the AI will bring a lot of incredible use cases and business cases to the service that we're not aware right now. But I think in analytics, it's pretty obvious, right? Yeah. It's pretty obvious, and therefore we as NPAW are investing a lot of research and developer capacities and resources there to develop how to use AI in analytics, and that for sure will be the thing on the roadmap for 2024 for us.
Nice. I mean, I think I completely agree with you on the point that it doesn't actually need to be about replacing people. It's an augmentation, right? Like you mentioned, that can process 1 million data points in the time it would take a human 10 years, right? Yeah. So I think augmenting human behavior is where it's really going. And that's definitely going to be relevant in things like data for streaming services. Like if it can improve my recommendation engine, then I'm going to be happy about that.
Yeah.
I think the worry is people have is that a lot of it's open source. So I think that's something they're going to have to overcome is as you mentioned, you're ISO certificated. AI is going to have to be that at some point to be able to have access to that data, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's where the future is going. But I think it's also uncertain in a sense that they need to provide a real roadmap for how we're going to control the sharing of that data.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I mean, I think that's everything for today, Till. I just want to thank you for your time. And I've got to say that NPAW is an apt name because you're a very nice person.
Thank you very much for inviting me, and thank you much for having me.
If you're still listening, please don't forget to give us a rating and review in your podcast directory of choice. It means an awful lot for a growing podcast like ours. Make sure you subscribe to be alerted when the next episode of Beyond the Stream will drop. Until next time.